Good morning. My name is Kim Crable, and I'm a community liaison at Hospice of Southern Maine. Thank you so much for joining our Ask the Experts webinar education series, which provides free community education on a variety of hospice topics. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with Barbara Karnes as part of our series. I don't think that there are many in the audience today that aren't familiar with Barbara. She's a registered nurse and an internationally recognized author, speaker, thought leader, and expert on end-of-life care and the dynamics of dying. Barbara was recognized in 2018 as a hospice innovator by the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization and was named the 2015 International Humanitarian Woman of the Year by the World Humanitarian Awards. Barbara's experience as a hospice care provider at the bedside of hundreds of people and as an administrator overseeing the care of thousands led to her 1985 publication of Gone From My Sight, The Dying Experience. Affectionately referred to in our industry as the Little Blue Book of Hospice, Gone From My Sight has sold over 30 million copies worldwide, is published in 12 languages, and remains the leading resource on the market today for educating families on the signs of approaching death. Barbara has many other award-winning publications and films, including her End-of-Life Guidelines series, which includes 5 booklets, which includes Gone From My Sight, and takes families dealing with a serious illness from diagnosis to the grief journey. Hospice of Southern Maine has just passed our first anniversary of this series. And it's very fitting that Barbara is our first expert who isn't an employee of ours, since she's made such an impact on our organization and community. We give her booklet, Gone From My Sight, to everyone we interact with who's considering hospice care. Actually, when I was promoting this webinar, I was speaking with a physician who was so excited about it. She went over to her bookshelf and she pulled out her dog-eared copy that we'd given her over a decade ago when she shadowed at our Gosnell Memorial Hospice House. So it makes an impact on people. Thank you so much for being here today, Barbara, and thank you for writing this booklet.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm glad that you invited me. I'm excited to see where we go with today.
So just so that you know, when people signed up, if they inquired about it and asked, we sent them one of your booklets, and we sent out a lot. So I'm making the assumption that most people who are joining us today are very familiar with this booklet, or maybe have received it in the mail recently. So we did get a lot of great questions, and I tried to put them in some order that would make sense for people. And Kimberly Mann, who's the other community liaison here at Hospice of Southern Maine, is going to be monitoring the chat. So if other questions come in that haven't been answered, we can also ask those of you. So my first question to you is, please tell us what prompted you to write this book and who was your target audience when you did write it?
Oh, okay. I was a primary care hospice nurse in the 80s. Before Medicare hospice, before people could even say the word. Often it was hospice, not hospice. Nobody knew what hospice was. So dying people was really my classroom. That's how I learned how people die. Because in the medical establishment, death is a failure or considered a failure, and no one really outlined how people died because generally no one was there. So being this primary care nurse, I was at the bedside of hundreds of people when they were dying. And my goal, and our goal at that time, was to be with the family at the moment of death. That was kind of the goal. Was in the months before death, we educated, support, got to know the family so that when they saw or got scared, they would call us and we would go make a call, no matter what time of day or night. So I'm on call and I get this call and the family's concerned about what mom's doing. So I roll out of bed and get in my car, and I'm sitting in the living room with the family. Mom is in the bedroom and she's not dying that minute, but she's in labor to leave this world. So in the living room with the family, I'm explaining to them what's going to come forward, what to look for. Here's what's mom's going to do. Call me and I'll come back. But, you know, we're talking days. She's not dying tonight. One of the daughters was taking notes. And I thought, oh my goodness, she should not have to be taking notes. So that weekend, I went home. This is before computers. We're talking in the 80s. What we wrote on were yellow legal pads. And so I take my yellow legal pad and sit on my sofa on a Saturday, and I start writing what I wanted to teach families, what I wanted them to know. And I came up with a list, a sheet, and I thought, no, a sheet of paper with a list is too cold. This is a time that people are frightened. I want to reassure them. They're under stress. I don't want to give them a lot of information. I just want to give them guidance, and I want to do it gently. And so I wrote Gone From My Sight, which outlines the signs of approaching death that starts months before death and goes right up to the minute. People under stress don't have the energy to read a book. And that's why I had it 13, 14 pages, why it's large print, why it's really 5th grade level, no medical ease, no medical words at all, and gentle.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And that makes sense, looking at it like it's a nice, short guideline. And I think that's what everyone appreciates. And the way when I was talking with people about it, I kind of felt like, from what I know about hospice, people used to be born and die at home. And then it flipped to the hospital model, that people were born and died in the hospital. And then when it was flipping back, when you were in hospice in the early years in the US, people weren't familiar. And I could imagine that, when people were going through some of the stages that you talk about in your book, that's when they called 911 to say they need to go to the hospital because they're not familiar with it, which of course is exactly where they didn't want to be. They wanted to be at home.
Well, and taking care of someone at end of life is different than taking care of someone who's going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so 90% of our work in end of life is education, because we have to teach families how we take care of people at end of life. Because if we don't teach them, then our work is judged by how people get better, and we will fail.
Yes, exactly.
No, we will fail. So I think that is a main focus of why we want early referrals, so that we can teach and guide. And the thing is, as you pointed out, we don't have any role models on what it's like to die. All we have is television and the movies, and people don't die like they do on television or the movies, but people don't know that. And again, our work is judged on what's happening. And when someone doesn't say something profound and then
yes, right.
then the family thinks something pathological is happening.
Yes, I agree.
That's why we have to teach.
Yes, thank you. Did you have any goals for your sales of this book when you wrote it? Because 30 million in all these languages is a huge accomplishment in terms of teaching. Like, did you have any idea it was going to be so popular?
None whatsoever. I wrote it for my families, and I took it into my boss because I was a primary care nurse. And I said, I wrote this for our families. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I'd like you to print it. I basically gave it, here, let's print this as an agency for our families. And he said, he looked at it and no, I'm not going to do that. And I said, oh, well, okay, then I'm going to print it and use it with my families. And he said, fine, do anything you want. So that's what I did. And in the back of the book is an order form. It was not as involved as the order form is today, but there was an order form. And one day and with our post office box. And one day I came home from work and my husband said, we got the strangest thing in the mail. There's a hospice in California that sent us the order form and they want 50 books. And we got in the mail the same day an order form from a hospice in Minnesota. And they wanted 50 books. And Gone From My Sight took on a life of its own. In my thinking is that the universe looked at this and said, hey, this is going to help. And the universe took over and got it out there because I didn't market it. I suppose it was sometime after we got those 2 orders and we started getting orders, and we don't even know how people got the books in other states. We started going to, we took 3 states, and we sent a copy to all the hospices in that state, which in the 80s, that was a handful of hospices in each state. And we got a 25% return on orders, which is really significant. So then we started go to NHPCO, which then was NHO, and as an exhibitor. And that's how we've marketed.
That's lovely. That's great. Like you said, there was a need, definitely. And there was a vacuum there and your book filled that need. That's great. So somebody asked us to ask you for them, is it better to go over the booklet with the patient and family or to let them read it later alone?
I love that question. I'm so glad someone asked, because and this frustrates me. So that's why I'm so glad you asked this question. What so many agencies do is they put it in their initial family packet, and then the majority of the families do not read it until after the fact. There's so many papers, they're so overwhelmed that they don't even notice it. What I would love families to do and hospices to do is on about the second visit, because the first visit, you're getting acquainted, you're signing papers, you're doing all kinds of stuff. So on about the second visit, the nurse or the social worker, it's okay, sits down with the family and they read it together. And they talk about it. Do you see where John, the family will often say, oh, I think John is on page 8. They in their mind can see the natural progression. Write, as a nurse, write in your care plan that you're going to talk and read the booklet with the family. Now you're consistently, as an agency, educating all of your families in the same manner. Surveyors love that, all right? And then when you have sat down and read it and answered all the questions, then you document that you've done just that, along with the questions and concerns the family has had. That's part of your 90% education. 90% of your work, education. And then you leave the booklet behind, and the family then knows this is a good resource, not just left in the initial family packet.
Yeah, that is great. That is fantastic advice. Now this question, I put all the questions that were asked in here, so there's just kind of a grab bag. This one just says, how do you talk to someone about dying? And I'm sure you've gotten this a million times, and I know, there's probably different answers depending on who it might be, but just a brief.
Okay, we who have the knowledge, we who are the professionals, we're the ones that have the responsibility to be honest, to not play games, to be direct, but gentle. And those are the guidelines that I think in any interaction with a patient or family that you're going to hold on to. I don't go into a patient and say, look, you and I both know you're going to die, and so let's talk about it. What I do is I look for areas that I can gently talk to them if they open the door, okay? With the family, I also tell the patient, I don't lie and I don't play games, and I'll talk about anything. That's on my first visit. Those are the three things I say to the patient and the family. With the family, I am more direct. I am direct. I will sit down and I will say, I think John is in labor, and that labor means, let's say, weeks, and here's what you're going to look for. I won't play the game with the family when they're in denial. I talk gently, but my job is to prepare the family for John's death. If it wasn't, he wouldn't be on hospice. Okay. So our obligation is to the family to guide and support them. They don't have to like me. They don't even have to believe me. But I am going to tell them where I believe John is, not in numbers, because you can't put a number on it, but in months, weeks, days, hours. I'm going to tell them that as we go. I'm going to do it gently, and I'm going to support them, but I'm not going to let them stay in denial. I'll let John stay in denial all he wants. If he wants to say, I'm going to get better, I'm not going to say yes. I'm not going to support that, but I'm not going to argue with him about that.
Yeah, good, good. When a patient is very anxious, what have you seen that is most comforting, or is it based on the circumstances?
Oh, of course, it's based on the circumstances. There, when someone is very agitated, first you have to see where they are in the dying process. Are they months from death? Are they weeks from death? Agitation comes, restlessness comes with the labor, which is weeks before death. So that's normal. And when you see that agitation, that random hand movement, the picking of the air, you can't get them settled. That's part of labor. You're going to look at the severity of that agitation. And there are times you're going to have to get the Haldol, but lots of times, maybe music, maybe touch, because the restlessness on all levels can be fear and probably has its origin in fear. And so whatever you can do to get them to relax, the key to getting out of your body is to relax. All you have to do is just literally let go and you can slide right out. But the agitation locks us in our body and makes our labor harder and longer. If that's a great question, and you've got to see where they are months, because the answers are different.
Right. Out of the blue, different question. Are you planning on writing more books in the future?
Oh, have you heard about my newest one? I just happen to have.
Great. What is it?
It's called By Your Side, and it's written for non-professional caregivers. Our caregivers, as I said, we don't, as caregivers, we don't understand the dying process. We judge care by how people get better. And so By Your Side is caregiving at end of life, to give that family, the caregiver, guidance. There's a worksheet daily that you mark down. He pooped today and he didn't eat today and he slept and didn't get out of bed, because the caregiver's memory is the first thing that goes. You know, you're under stress, you don't remember. So there's a daily sheet to help guide you. The other thing is, most caregivers find themselves in a position because of their own personality. They tend to be caregivers on many levels, and that's how they ended up this caregiver for parents. We all are, not all, but a lot of us are at a place where our parents are older, and that's going to be your future, is taking care of mom or dad, or having a spouse that is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And so people who are caregivers tend to put themselves last, and their needs don't get met. So I've got a whole chapter on how to take care of yourself, how to put your oxygen mask on first, so that you can continue to take care of your special person. So it's totally geared for the non-professional who finds themselves in a caregiving role.
That's great. That's going to be a great resource.
I hope so. I hope so.
Sounds great. Have you ever thought about adding something to Gone From My Sight about how many people need to be alone in order to slip out of their body, like you mentioned?
I have not thought about that. And the reason I haven't, and that's very true, there is an aspect, and in one of my books, it might be the 11th hour. Remind me to talk about the 11th hour. Gone From My Sight is a short list of the signs of approaching death. It's not really about what you do about it. And so I think that is the core, is the difference. What I teach what to do at the moment of death and how to take care of someone. But the goal for when I was in hospice was to be there. And over the years, hospice has spent less and less time with the patient and family. And generally, families are alone at the moment of death. And because of that, I wrote The 11th Hour, where Gone From My Sight says to the family, here's what's happening. This says, here's what you can do as family while it's happening. And in here, and I'm sure it's in here, I can't tell you where, would be addressing that we have, I know it's in here, we have limited control over the time that we die. If you're with someone when they die, you are with them because they want you there. If you are not with someone when they die and you tried to be and you wanted to be, then let go of the regret and take the gift of love and protection that that family member gave you. We have limited control. We often die when no one's there as a means of protecting our loved ones. And I'm pretty sure that's in here, but I wouldn't add it to Gone.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. What has been the most common reason that families give you for finding it difficult to accept that their loved ones are near the end of life? Like, is there a reason that you ever find out that people are in that denial?
I don't think the people give it to me, but here's my thoughts on it. It's never going to be okay for someone that we know and love to die. We are always going to want mom or dad with us, even if mom and dad is trapped in a physical body that isn't working. I would, and this is selfish, I know, but this is so normal. I want mom here. And if I can go to the hospital or the nursing home and sit there and hold her hand, even if she doesn't respond to me, I've got my mom. And so we don't want to let go of those that we love and cherish. Oftentimes we don't want to let go of those we don't even love, you know. So but that's a normal part of a human being, I think.
Yeah, I agree. What guidance do you give to family members who sit vigil at the bedside of their dying loved one for days and sometimes weeks?
If that's what they want to do, then great, I will support them. I don't see anything wrong with that. I will tell them what I just said about we have limited control. And so you can sit there and hold mom's hand for 2 weeks and she can be in labor on death's door and you get up to pee and she'll die if she wants to protect you.
Yeah.
And so you have to take care of yourself as well during this vigil. And so you're going to educate the family member about the control that the person who's dying has. And every time that family member leaves for the night or to go to the bathroom, you say, Mom, I love you so much and I'm here for you, but I understand when you have to leave. And so you say in the days when mom is non-responsive and she first begins being non-responsive, you encourage each family member to go in and talk to mom and talk about their life, talk about their relationships, the good times, the difficult times, and say everything you need to say. And so then from that point on, you can sit there, you can hold their hand, but know that I believe they can hear you, even in the moments following death. But so you talk to them, but if they want to stay for weeks, that's fine.
That's lovely. And here's a question that I know can take a long time, but maybe briefly, can you please explain the difference between palliative and hospice care?
Oh, you're right. That could take a long time.
Mhm.
All right. Palliative care is, I will say what it started out to be. I'm not sure what it is today, and I'm not sure too many people know what it is today. It started out to be for people that have a life-threatening illness, but they're not going to die in the next couple of months. You know, it was the precursor for a family to have before they were appropriate for hospice. And so they had a life-threatening illness, and then they had all these resources to support and guide them through this illness journey. And then when it was the professionals saw that death was more imminent within months, 4, 5 months before they thought death was going to occur. And there you look at eating, sleeping, and social interactions to give those are your guidance for, okay, now we're talking 2, 3, 4 months. And then palliative care was supposed to hand it off to hospice. I don't know there's so many different ways that different places are doing it that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. This is from an occupational therapist. She or he says, I'm always interested in hearing about the interdisciplinary roles within hospice care. Do you think the interdisciplinary team covers all the bases? Or if you could rework hospice care, would you add any more specialties?
Ooh.
It's a good one, huh?
Yeah. I would add end-of-life doulas. Because I know some hospices have no one dies alone programs. They have transition volunteers. I would put end-of-life doulas on the staff, and their job would be to be with that family at the moment of death. They have to build up a relationship for that. So they would be making visits also, but they can supplement the nurse, the social worker, the occupational therapist is going to be, if we get the referral early enough. You know, once labor is begun, an occupational therapist isn't going, and I'll probably get feedback from that, but they're not going to be able to really work with the patient because they're so removed from their body. But if we get the referrals months before death, occupational therapists can guide the caretakers in how to care for this person at home, which is really, really needed and aren't used enough.
That's interesting though, because typically when we do these, we have a lot of end of life, death doulas who join in. So it's kind of interesting that you say that.
Well, end of life doulas, dying is not a medical event. Dying is a social communal event. You don't have to be a nurse or a doctor or even a social worker to work with end of life. You have to understand end of life, and our medical establishment doesn't. So what I look for is not the knowledge that a worker has, but their heart, because you've got to have a special heart to work in end of life. And the end of life doula movement is drawing people that have that heart call to them. A huge difference is hospice, because of all of its regulations, that has its hands tied. And what it has lost in all the regulations is time, where doulas have the time to spend with a family and a patient. And time is the best medicine that we offer end of life. Our time to be there to support. And that's why, not as volunteers, but figure out how to put an end of life doula on salary, because on salary, they can work 60 hours a week and they get paid their salary. Where if they're hourly, then after 40, it goes into time and a half, and you get all that entanglement. So it will take thinking outside of the box for a hospice to integrate paid end of life doulas. I'd love to see that happening.
That's great. I think you've already talked to this a bit. Is there a reluctance by physicians to refer patients to hospice? And can you explain the reason behind your answer? I know you've talked about they're in the business of curing rather than death, but I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
It takes a great deal of courage for anyone to say, you know, I've given it my best shot and I can't fix you. It takes courage to do that, and to go against all that you've been trained. You know, I used to do grand rounds, and invariably I would get from a physician of, the reason we are doing so well with leukemia or with whatever is because we treated people until they died. And what we learned from that person, we applied to the next one. And my response was, that's great. And there are a lot of people that will say to you, yes, I want to be that pioneer, and you treat me till the last breath so that you can learn. But there's other people that'll go, you know what? I don't want to do that. And a physician's responsibility is to say, here's my best shot. We've done what we can, and I can't fix you. And here's now what I recommend. And that takes so much courage to do that, to go against what they've been trained to do.
Yeah. And I think it takes some courage for the patient to go against what the physician might recommend, right? Because that's a stepping off that path of what you've always, what we all know is healthcare, right? And you're saying, no, I don't want that. I want this.
Good point. Great point. Yes, absolutely.
How do you best support someone who does not have a meaningful spiritual practice?
You don't have to have a meaningful spiritual practice to die. And you don't have to have a meaningful spiritual practice to have a good death. You know, it is not up to us to bring our personal agenda of what a meaningful spiritual practice is to anyone. If it works for me, my belief system, that's great. But it is not up to me to impose my belief system on you. If that's why you're working with end of life, you're in the wrong job. That is not what we're about.
Good answer. I appreciate that. Can you talk a little about caregiver burnout? When I put my loved one on hospice respite care, I always feel guilty about leaving for a week.
By your side, by your side. Of course, there's going to be caregiver burnout. It's hard work. It's darn hard work. And you've got to get a system in place to support you so you can continue to do this work. And that means taking the week off. That means having a listener, someone you can call on the phone, not who's going to have answers, but someone that you can say, you wouldn't believe what he did today. And to download your frustration because it's hard work. And end of life, dying, doesn't change a person's personality. It intensifies it. So if someone was demanding, they're going to be off the scale in their demands. If they were ornery and cantankerous in normal living, they're going to be an absolute monster to take care of. If they're laid back, easygoing, content to watch the soaps all afternoon, that person's going to be a little marshmallow in dying. So being a caregiver is extremely hard work, and you need a support, whether it's including friends, neighborhoods support, family, and professional. And I've got a whole chapter. We're limited with time.
Yeah. Okay.
I've got a whole chapter. Read the book.
That's phenomenal. Here is this is a caregiver one too, pretty much. How does one keep their emotions intact when working in hospice? I want to volunteer, but I get very emotional even thinking about it.
Okay. I would say then you're probably not going to find satisfaction in hospice. When I do volunteer training, the first session, sometimes more than one, is on what is your belief system? Not spiritual, but what do you believe happens when someone dies? And explore our thoughts and feelings about death and our own beliefs, our own experiences. What was the first experience that you had with death? And generally it's grandpa died when I was a child and they wouldn't let me go to the funeral, or, we carry those memories with us and they build upon our concept of death and dying. So you have to explore that first, and your personality. Most of the people that I took care of as children of God. And I provided care, and I recognize that we are born, we experience, and we die, and everybody dies. And I have the ability to guide and support those people. Every once in a while, a person got into my heart, Barbara's heart, and I carried that person in a different space within me. And I grieved. I can tell you the number of patients that got into my heart and why. Charles, the father, I could go on, and I still grieve for them. But if every person gets into your heart and fills an empty space, I would say, why is your heart so empty? And let's look and see how you can fill your heart so that you then have some to give.
That's lovely. And there is, I just want to say, there are other ways to volunteer at hospice that you're not interacting with patients, and you can help in the office or things like that, where you obviously are at this webinar and you're drawn to this work, but there are ways that would not have you interfacing with people and maybe be so painful. I am interested in hearing about your familiarity with certified music practitioners with Music for Healing and Transition program and our work. Are you familiar with that program or with the music therapy in general? I'm sure you are. You mentioned it.
I don't know specifics.
Yeah.
What I know is that music can be very, very relaxing and soothing and healing. You know, I have a friend who is a moody blues crazy person. I mean, she adores him, Jason or whatever his name. Anyway, when she's in labor, we're going to play that music because the moody blues is her thing. Probably a harp music isn't going to do anything for her. So the music, how we respond to it is individualized. And that's where the healing comes in my mind.
Yeah. That makes sense. My father-in-law passed several years ago, and he was in the hospital, he had a stroke, and they played big band music in the hospital room, and everyone danced, and it was, it was very meaningful to the family, and they were sure that he heard it and was happy.
That's how you do it. That's
exactly
how you do it.
How has the Death with Dignity law changed how patients and families prepare for death?
I don't really know.
Yeah.
But I will say to you that if you go to the website of AAHPM, American Academy of Medicine and Palliative Care, AAHP, Hospice and Palliative Medicine.
Okay.
And put in search physician-assisted dying. They have a whole list of articles that you can read about that subject. Also, the deathwithdignity.org has an outline of what assisted physician dying is all about, including the 11 states that offer it. And, I would say those are your two best resources that I'm aware of to learn more about that. I will say to you that most people who have been told they can't be fixed in the months before death, the earlier from the moment of diagnosis and being told, I can't fix you, in those months, most people think about suicide. I can count on one hand, in all the years I've worked in end of life, the number of people that have actually killed themselves. All right. What we're thinking in the months before death is, I am more afraid of dying than I am of being dead. I just want to skip over this dying part. If you can't fix me and I'm going to die, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Most people don't have the courage to do it. It takes a great deal of courage to kill ourselves in whatever form. And most people don't do it.
And we, if people do, we have death with dignity laws in Maine, and people can be on hospice, and I don't know how it works in other states, but people can be on hospice, but we can't participate, and they can't be at our Gosnell Hospice House. But if they choose that route, we can come in immediately after they and their family go through that process to assist them, which I think is a humane way of helping when someone wants that control over their end of life. Here's a question about the interdisciplinary team. How can a chaplain best serve as part of this team?
Not only supporting the patient and family, but supporting the team members. I think that that is a part that often gets overlooked, is that not from a, we tend to think of chaplains in a spiritual, in a spiritual role, loving and supporting and guiding people is a spiritual role. And unfortunately, so many families associate the word chaplain with religion that I think it's up to all of the team members to promote and help the family understand the role of a chaplain and how much a chaplain can support and guide a family, and that it has nothing to do with religion.
Mhm. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really good point, that the team will need their support as well. I think that's phenomenal. Here's a great question. I am new to hospice. What advice would you give me?
I would say, ask yourself why you want to do this work. Recognize and know in your heart that dying really has nothing to do with medicine or with the medical, and that you have to put that training aside, basically, and learn how the medical aspect of end of life is different than taking care of someone who gets better. But you've got to look in your personality and see if you are comfortable with that. Not everyone in the medical arena can really look at death as this is normal, this is natural, and I will support a person to get there. If you started out in the medical model, this is a little off track, but I never worked as a nurse. I graduated from nursing school and said, I made a huge mistake. I should have never been a nurse. I should have been a social worker. I never worked. It wasn't until hospice philosophy came along in the 70s that I thought, this is something I can do. This fits in with my belief system that we are born, experience, and die, and that everybody dies, and I can do this. You have to look inside yourself first. And if you're new, are you there because it's the only job that was offered and you got bills to pay? Or are you there because your heart said, you know what? Look at hospice, look at end of life. And when your heart tells you to do that, then learn everything you can about end of life. And then bring yourself, who you are, with your gentleness, with your wanting to help, with your heart energy, and you'll do great. I have always said, I can teach anyone how to take care of someone at end of life. What I can't give them is the heart to do that end of life work. And so when I hire someone, that's what I'm looking at, is inside.
That's great. So on the other side of that, someone who's not new, but someone who's been there for a while, what has helped sustain you over your years of working with hospices and doing this grief and death and dying work? How do you sustain yourself?
Well, first off, it's my belief system, which I keep saying, we're born, experience, and we die. It's the name of the game. So that, and taking care of myself. I learned early on, like the first year of all my patients dying, that I had to develop a ritual of closure for each patient. I realized that I was going from a death to new patients and a death and new patients. And I was just putting all those feelings, because even though I said there's just a handful of special patients, all of them touch our lives. And I was just kind of moving on, and then fell in a little heap and kept saying there are so many ghosts. So I developed a ritual. And for me, my closure was going to encouraging an open casket visitation for my families. I think that's an important part of the grieving process. So I encouraged that as part of my teaching. But I went to every visitation. Funerals are too long and you just sit there. Visitations are about visiting and interacting. And that's where we're still working and helping ourselves. So I would go up to the coffin, literally put my hand on the body, because everyone's watching. Oh, look at that hospice nurse. She's here. She came, number one, to the visitation. And look what she's doing. Oh, she's straightening John's tie, for goodness sakes. You know, I put my hand on his body and I say softly to John, thank you for coming into my life. And I wish you well on your journey. That's my closure to John. Then I would go to the family and I would put my hand on their arm and say, I want to say thank you for coming into my life. And I wish you all well on your journey. And then I'm done. Now, we aren't having a lot of visitations today, but I say to all of you, create your ritual. It may be a journal and you write the patient's name and their date of death and a couple sentences about them. You may have a little space in your house where you go in and light a candle and say their name and say some words and then blow out the candle. Whatever, be creative. What helps you? What is your ritual? And I think that will help. It helped me, and I think it will help people stay in this work.
That is tremendous. And we're right up against 12:30. And can I just say, it's so obvious why people love you so much.
Oh.
We got a lot of great questions, but we also got things like just no questions, just deep and heartfelt appreciation for all her work. And no questions, just gratitude for her booklet, and congregants have found her videos helpful, and just wonderful feedback. So thank you so much for doing the work you do and being here with us today. We really appreciate it. And anyone who's in the audience who hasn't already should go to Barbara's website, bkbooks.com, and sign up for her blog, Something to Think About, which is wonderful. And we'll continue this conversation.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much. Blessings to you all.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Bye.
Bye.